A very warm welcome to all our participants. Hi, Aditi, Tarun, Amit, Ayushi, Baumek, Chirag, Divyal, Dr. VLN, Mauli, Millie, Parvati, Sapna, Ushma, Vanita, Vijay Kumar, Vishal, Yugandhar, Arman. Thank you all for joining in. Hi, Bhavik. Well, it's time to begin with our today's webinar. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We have heard several times the principle of failing fast and often, and many entrepreneurs associate it with Eric Rice, lean startup methodology, or the techniques of Steve Blank. However, the pioneer of this was Thomas Alva Edison, who made 1,000 unsuccessful attempts at inventing the light bulb. When a reporter asked, "How did it feel to fail 1,000 times?" Edison replied, "I didn't fail 1,000 times. The light bulb was an invention with 1,000 steps. By that moment, it wasn't called design thinking." How can we use this art in achieving success? Let's hear it from our expert. HR Association of India welcomes you all to the 2021 Dialogue Masterclass series on the topic, The Art of Design Thinking. To know more about HRAI and its event, I would request all our participants to kindly visit the link and details posted in the chat window. Request all the participants to kindly follow the webinar guidelines mentioned in the chat window. It would be great to have all the participants' feedback. We'll be running a poll before the Q&A session. Request all the participants to kindly give your feedback on the session. I now take the privilege to introduce our esteemed speaker for today, Mr. Tarun Agarwala, co-founder Wellnessworx. He is currently bootstrapping Wellnessworx, a behavioral wellness startup, on a mission to help organizations and their people apply first principles of behavioral science to their operations by building a continuous individual and organizational emotional wellness support system. As a co-founder and hustler, he drives the vision using his rich experience in sales and leadership. He is a commerce grad with an MBA in product leadership, currently pursuing his interest as a student of neuropersonality and culture. His passion in his field also drives his involvement in a number of forums and partnering with organizations to drive change in their policies and initiatives. Prior to starting Wellnessworx, he spent almost 2 decades in the IT and telecom sector. His last assignment was with the Tata Group, where he led the regional consulting practice for ICT services. You can also follow him on LinkedIn. The details for the same are mentioned in the chat window. I now hand over the platform to Mr. Tarun Agarwala. Over to you, Tarun.
Thank you, Peterson, for a very courteous remark. We're still hoping that Wellnessworx does what it has set out to, but looks like we're going to be pivoting on the idea, and it is going to steer more towards healthcare and more towards probably B2C healthcare as we see. All right, so with that, thank you everyone for joining and spending this time on a Friday, trying to understand what design thinking is all about. So before I proceed, and I have a presentation, presentations are normally boring, but just to ensure that we have a little bit more clarity, I have put a PPT together. Normally, design thinking is a workshop. I mean, it's a hands-on learning exercise. It's something that you apply. It's like painting. It's like art, right? And so it's not. It's difficult to explain in theory what design thinking is. I'll try my best though. And 1 hour is not enough. Obviously, normally workshops go in for 2 days, 3 days. And when you do a real world design thinking to solve a problem, it can even take a week or so. But let me try my best to demystify some of the things around design thinking. A few questions that I already have that has been sent to me, which I will try and cover in my presentation. And if this doesn't cover your questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and speak up. We can take 5 minutes to kind of see what you understand about design thinking, or what are your thoughts or questions around this. Some questions that I have is, what is meant by design thinking process? Why is design thinking very important? What is or are the differences between design philosophy and design thinking? Well, okay. Why is design thinking critical to design learning? How does design thinking impact development of online learning? That this is a good one. And how to develop a design thinking approach that unifies digital and physical experiences. That's a tough one. Okay, so these are the questions that I have that I hope to cover. Does anybody have any other question or observation or anything that you would like me to cover as part of this exercise? Please feel free to unmute yourself and say. And if you can't unmute yourself, Peterson, please try to help through the chat or something. And I would be, and you can message me, so it'd be easier for me to see your questions over WhatsApp, and then I can talk about them.
Sure.
Okay. Should we take a minute to see if anybody's asking anything? I think Chetan is trying to connect to his audio. He's trying to ask something maybe. Okay, so I think we will carry on. We will proceed with demystifying design thinking. All right, let me start with sharing a presentation. Okay, is this all visible, or can you see the video as well, video panel as well on the left, or
Yes,
on the top?
we can see your screen.
But do you see the video panel on the top?
No, we don't
No.
see any
Okay.
video
Okay.
panel.
Which is good enough. Which is good. Okay. Okay. So what is design thinking? Design thinking is not so much about design as it is as much about thinking. It is a process. It is a process of thinking. It's come to be known as design thinking primarily, and I think so because it's been popularized by the design company Ideate, which has been a leading design company in creating products, even for that matter. Your shopping carts in malls were first created by Ideate. So it was first designed by them. And they have designed more than 1,000 products for companies. And they utilize a certain framework to go through, to understand what customers want and how should they design products. So they thought more in terms of building experiences for their customers and less about the look and feel. So the look and feel is all part of it. So that's the first thing. It's less about design and more about thinking. The design follows once the thinking process follows. So this is how a typical design thinking room looks like. Okay, you would have all stakeholders, multiple stakeholders from multiple functions coming together, including the customer. In Microsoft, if they couldn't have the customer in the room, there's an example where they would create a persona of a person, in fact, a full body, a life-size mannequin, Scarlett Linda maybe, and they would have that person sit in the room, which is a mannequin, and think from that person's perspective, think from the customer's perspective. So in a way, the customer is also there in the room, and all other stakeholders, your engineers, your designers, product managers, salespeople, could be from marketing, could be from finance, so on and so forth. And it's fun because you can see how colorful it is. It has got a lot of color pencils to work with. So it takes you back to your childhood. So anybody who loves to think and wants to think and solve a problem, actually it's no more boring. So you can play with this framework because it's incredibly colorful. And I love it precisely for that reason. Okay, moving on. So let's take a definition of design thinking, and feel free to communicate as much as you can, because I hope you can hear me. I don't hear anybody, so it feels more like a monologue. But try and see if you can interact in between and ask some questions. So the definition of design thinking, and this is how I am defining it, is an empathetic way of thinking how to solve human problems. So the two key aspects are empathetic. So it's an approach. It's a systematic approach towards solving a problem, and it's essentially human-centric. So these two aspects, if you bear in mind, then it starts demystifying what design thinking is all about. Now the question is, why should you even bother about this mode of thinking? All this while we have been thinking in a certain way. Why is design thinking now popular, or why do we need to even give it any sort of importance? It's because we now live in a world of extremely high uncertainty. We have always done so. And it's not a new approach. It's just that this approach has now become more popular, more mainstream. And what was being used by a few product companies, so to speak, to solve problems for their customers in terms of creating products that look good and is incredibly useful, we can see that this framework or approach can be applied to our lives as well, wherever we are in a state of high certainty. So we have a problem, but we don't really know how to navigate through that problem. And human emotions are involved. So really, you can actually use it to solve problems with your children as well. So if your child is undergoing a certain problem, you can actually deconstruct that and be able to help your child as well by solving your child's problem. And that's how powerful this tool is. And so the two checkpoints to see when you should use design thinking or think about design thinking is when there is high certainty in a certain situation that there is probably a problem, or you're trying to understand a problem, but you don't really know how to go about it. There is no precedence, or the experience with the precedence is not up to the mark. Competition has caught up. Something else has to be done. COVID-19, work from home, this is a situation that has thrown a huge amount of uncertainty in our face. We HR leaders primarily have to now deal with what to do, what not to do in terms of creating experiences for their employees, how to keep them engaged, how to create serendipitous environment for them to synchronize, to be able to talk to each other, not feel alone, not feel lonely. So a lot of emotions involved there. So I hope this connects. But is it just about human beings? I mean, if it's just about human beings, then it's going to be really difficult to explain it to the business, because then because you need support. You need support from multiple stakeholders. And that's why, while human is at the forefront of when you think about applying this approach to solve a problem, and hence it is a problem that is desirable to be solved. Not all problems need to be solved. So again, that is important to understand. Not all problem needs to be solved, but the problem that is desired to be solved has a business viability, which means it makes sense in terms of business. There is an ROI that can be fetched through it if you think hard. And it should be technologically possible to do it. I mean, for instance, right now, if hologram is technologically feasible but not viable because it's extremely expensive, you cannot use hologram for team meetings right now. And let's say holograms were not feasible. So then, even if you could create some budgets, but technology is not available. So, and hence, it's a balance between desirability of what problem to solve of the human being. And what is meant by design thinking process. So any questions, I can take them right now, or I can move ahead.
Yeah, Tarun, we can move ahead and
Okay.
then cover the questions later.
Okay. Now, one of the good things about design thinking is that how to navigate or understand design thinking, it gives us an approach for that as well. And that's the beauty of design thinking. So it tells us, well, think in terms of why, how, and what, and you will be able to navigate. And this is a great way to learn anything. What's the mindset required? What skill sets do you need for that? And what tool sets you need? So if you remember this framework, you know how to learn anything. And this again comes from this framework of design thinking. And I love this. So mindset, empathetic mindset, and what's empathy we will decode in a bit. It's a process, as I said earlier. It's a system. It's a system of understanding emotions and then taking it towards action. Skill sets that we require is specifically systems and process. What do you need to know about them? And tool sets include your stakeholders, your frames, your frameworks, that room that we showed, those pencils and colors, and a thought process, of course. So let's start with the mindset. So why design thinking, right? So that's the fundamental question. That's because it is slow and it's deliberate. It's not fast. So it's not something that which is linear. So it's not something you already know. If you already know the answer, if you already know the solution, you don't apply design thinking. It's only applied when there's uncertainty, but then you don't rush into it, which means you don't use your type 1 style of thinking. If, some of you who might have read this book, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, would be able to understand this faster and better. But let me give you a quick example. So Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, they 40 years they spent in researching human behavior, and one of the and they have written multiple papers. And one of the bestsellers, the book is Thinking Fast and Slow, which came out after they won the Nobel Prize. Daniel Kahneman won it. Amos Tversky had passed away by then, so posthumously it was not possible to give it to him. Just a brief note. So what they found was that we have two types of thinking. One is thinking fast, which is intuitive, and the other one is thinking slow. So for instance, let's take an example. 2 times 2, pop comes the answer 4, right? 10 times 10, pop comes the answer 100, because somewhere it's there in your memory and it manifests from there. So it's a thumb rule. So you know what the thumb rule is, and you apply it and you have the answer. But let me just say, you have to equate 27 times 350. Now you need a little bit of thinking to do. You might even need a pen and paper to calculate and say what that is. Similarly, most of our thinking, which is used as fast thinking, we make a lot of mistakes when doing that, because those come from our biases, our beliefs, and we create certain thumb rules. Your stereotypes, prejudices that we create are all part of our system 1 thinking. And when we slow it down in any situation, to think a little bit more deeper, we let the emotion pass, and then we go deeper into breaking things and narrowing down and understanding what the solution could be or what the answer really is. And that's why it's easy to compute 10 times 10, but difficult to compute 27 times 350 unless you're Shakuntala Devi, of course. For her, we'll take another example. All right, so let's demystify empathy. So I've been talking about slow and deliberate. We have been talking about empathy as a process. So why empathy, and why is it a slow and deliberate process? So empathy is not an emotion. Empathy is a way of understanding your surrounding, specifically what to do. It has got all three components: the neurological, psychological, and sociological components, all three meshed together. We, as human beings, the first thing that occurs to us is a biological tool that we use, which is a result of millions of years of evolution. Is we use our emotion as a compass. Our emotions, I mean, so when people say don't be emotional, it really doesn't mean anything. It's important to feel that emotion. What are you going through? What's that feeling? And there are 6 basic emotions, but then you have simple. Those are simple emotions, and when you combine them, you have complex emotions. For instance, a simple emotion would be fear. Another one is surprise. A complex one would be shock, which is both surprise and fear put together. So happiness and sadness, these are simple emotions. And that's the first compass. So our feelings dictate what we're going to be thinking and how we're going to be thinking. It's not the other way around. It's not we think first and then we feel. It's the other way around. We feel and then a thought triggers in our mind. And that's empirically proven through neuroscience. And that's why they say that even before you make the decision, your brain has already made it. It's specifically born out of how you feel right now and what's your thumb rule. Let's take an example that let's say somebody has the habit of shouting. Let's take that as an example, right? So whenever that person is stressed, that person shouts. Now, if there is a situation that is presented, which is stressful, that person most likely would shout instead of, even if it's a room full, the person may lose control and shout instead of taking a step back and thinking and doing the right thing, maybe not shouting and try to maybe converse and create a dialogue. Because that's a habit that has been built, and that's the system one way of thinking, which is more intuitive and quick. Intuitive thinking works great if it comes from experience. And that's why if a salesman suppose a sales guy says, this order is going to come, and that salesperson has got 15 years of, say, sales experience, you can trust that person because it's coming from experience. But say a novice salesperson says that this order is going to come, you might want to take it with a pinch of salt because there's not enough experience to have that kind of an intuitive understanding. So the first thing is feeling, but then feeling is not enough. When you feel the emotion of the other person, so you can sympathize, which is you can see that the other person is feeling sad, and all of us as human beings, and we have the capacity to look at the other person's situation, look at the other person's facial expressions, eyes, specifically the eyes and the lip area. And it's easy to make out what the other person is going through right now. Probably the person is angry or the person is sad or happy. You can make out. But then now you have to decode why that person is feeling like that. If you know that person, you might, if you know the situation, you might know why. If you don't know, then you have to ask, right? So then you have to figure out why a certain person is feeling in a certain way. And if you don't do that, the problem is You might be sympathetic towards the person, which means a good example is, say, a person playing football twisted his knee and fell down. Now, sympathetically, our reaction would be to pick that person up. What that would do is actually destroy the person's knee further, right? It would, because maybe the bones have twisted and it's become a bit of powdery inside. And now if you lift that person and the person tries to stand on his or her feet, it would create even more damaging impact on the knee and on the bones. However, now if you think what to do here, now if you have experienced that and you understand that when a person has twisted his or her knee and has fallen down, instead of picking up that person, you want to ask that person to stay still as is, get a stretcher and put that person on that stretcher and then take him to the hospital. That is the thinking part that is required, and that comes from experience mostly, and understanding the situation. And that's the psychological input. So the feeling is more neurological, that's your biological aspect, those are chemicals. And then your thinking is more psychological, which tells you how you have to go about processing this information about feeling. And then comes the action. Now, if you stop at thinking, that is, if you can feel the problem, you know why that problem is, but you don't take an action, which can happen, which can happen primarily because there is a fraction of a second, which is about 500 milliseconds, when, if let's say the situation is not particularly a happy situation, then the observer also goes through a bit of a personal distress. And if you're in a hurry or speed, or you have a way to escape, you would. Most probably you would. And one of the examples that I've used in a previous discussion, and I'll share that with you if you've not been part of that, is I think all of us, or most of us, would have seen this movie Mashal. And in that movie, there's an excellent scene where Dilip Kumar, at the dead of night, has Vaida Rahman with him, and he is frantically shouting and asking for help. Ki, "Eh bhai, koi to hospital le jao, somebody help." And we see all lights of the building switched off, so maybe people are sleeping, so they're not even hearing that voice. And we see a few cars pass by, and we kind of think as audiences, why aren't the cars stopping? The reason for that is very simple, is that they might have seen the problem, but there is a personal distress that is caused to them as well, that, oh shit, there is something happening. And they are at a certain speed. So if they can escape the situation, they will escape the situation. And that's why it's important to slow down to be able to take any action. And hence it is a deliberate action, and it's a slow way of doing things. Now, if you have any questions on empathy, do ask me. It's my pet subject, and I'm doing some research on it. So I'll be more than happy to answer more questions on that as well. So I hope empathy is clear. So now let's dive into, so that's the mindset. Just to summarize, we were talking about what's the mindset required, and we said slow and deliberate thinking, which is applying your system to thinking, slow down, understand, feel the other person's emotion, think why that person is going through that, and then take action, and know that you would be also, you would have your own biases. It could be distress, it could be any other bias that might slow you down, that might not allow you to take action, and you have to be cognizant of that to be able to take action. We'll demystify this a little bit more when we go into tool sets. Now, what skill set is required for this? The skill set is necessarily, again, the thinking process. So most of us, we are, through our education system, we are, this is how we think, because, which is linear, that if the teacher asks us a question, we're supposed to know the answer. We're supposed to remember and know the answer. We are hardly taught how to approach a certain problem and how to reach a certain answer. People with science background might have a slightly better edge. I studied commerce and I mucked up a lot of stuff. So I know that a lot of my thought process has been linear, rote memorization, and that's how I've mostly passed in my school days. And I'm making up for that now by using a different approach of thinking and learning. And that thinking and that process is, you might have come across this as well, which is divergent thinking. That is quantity first, quantity of ideas first. So if this is a problem, what could be the possible solution? So you might have 100 ideas. So you don't settle for the first idea that comes to your mind. Generally, the first idea or the first few ideas are not so great. Also because statistically, if you are thinking of that idea, probably another 30 people would also think of the same idea. So there's going to be nothing unique about it. It may not really create that kind of impact or experience that you might want to create. So now let's take this example of the HR is trying to create an experience for their employees. First of the few ideas that would come with the problem, say work from home, would be ideas that you would have picked up over the web while reading maybe an HBR report or talking to a colleague, another CHRO, what that person is doing in his or her company. And those would be the few ideas that will pop up in your mind. Those may not be the best ideas for your company. Why? Because in your situation, things might be different. Maybe the person you have heard this from is a service company and you're a product company. Maybe the person who has advised you has employees who are mostly salespeople, and you have a company that has got mostly engineers. So it's going to be, you can't compare these two personalities, and you cannot be doing the same thing that's being done in that company. So you cannot imitate. So then what do? You bring in as many ideas as possible. So you diverge, and then you converge on the ideas. You chop, and you reach a certain limited number of ideas from there. So that's the skill set that is required. Trust me, it is incredibly hard, and it's easier to say that get as many ideas as possible, and that's why I think human beings are a social group, or we are gregarious, because individually we can only think so much. The best of the best, the genius, even Elon Musk for that matter, would be able to come up only with a limited set of ideas. But when you are with a group of people, primarily stakeholders who have knowledge about a certain subject or their area, or can bring in diverse perspectives, would be able to give you or come together with a multitude of ideas. And that's why it's important to have multiple stakeholders and multiple people to come together and discuss a certain problem, rather than a single person or you alone going after it like an ekla chalo re. You don't need to be ekla chalo re. Get people together. Right, so that's the skill set you require, and the system that we require is iterative, and this is where we're going to spend a little bit time. I'll go through this one by one. So the first thing, what happens? So we said it's a systematic approach. So design thinking is an empathetic, systematic approach. So what's that system? The system is what happens first, what comes next, and then what comes next, right? So that's a system. So the first thing obviously is what's inspiring, what has happened. It could that defines the purpose. For instance, COVID-19, work from home. Now that's something that has now pushed you to think about a problem, and hence now you have to think about it. But there could be situations where maybe COVID-19 has not happened and you don't have the situation, but you still could find, how do I make this better? Or how do I do this in a different way? How could I increase profits? Or how could I increase revenues? Or how could I make my employees happier? How could I make my employees find their ikigai, find their purpose. That could be an inspiration. And that's half the race one. If you have the purpose defined well, why are you even delving into this approach of design thinking? What is that you're trying to solve? It's not a problem. We're not still talking about the problem. We're just saying, how can we make something better? And it's an inspiration. For instance, I'm thinking about how do we ensure that the world that is going through about 30% does not adhere to health prescriptions, or do not adhere to treatment, be it from mental health to diabetes to thyroid patients. They miss their medication. So the inspiration to me is how do I help people not miss that medication? And now we have to go deeper. I don't know the answer. So to go deeper, we have to now empathize, which means that we have to understand from people what are the challenges that they are going on a day-to-day basis. A diabetic patient might say that, well, there's nobody at my home, and the nearest pharmacy is miles away, and Pharmacy and MedLife are not supplying in my area. So that could be a problem. In another area, there could be another problem. Another person could have a different type of problem. So you go and try and spend time with people. And this is where your research comes to play. So it's a qualitative and quantitative research method that you apply. And the most effective is the ethnographic research. Ethnographic research means that you watch and observe a person in real life to see what that person is undergoing, what problems that person is undergoing in that scope of, in that area of problem that you're trying to solve. For instance, if an HR leader wants to know how to help their employees work from home better, they would actually need to visit a few employees at their homes and try and see if they can spend some time to see what problems they could face at home. And then create a category, and for those categories, start solving the problems. This is the best way to be able to approach it. And then obviously, once you have a whole list of data that you would have from while empathizing and while conducting your research, then you have to sharpen your focus on the most important problems that you can solve. So you'll have 10 things that will come out of your research, of course, and then you narrow. That's where the divergence and convergence way of thinking comes to play. So first you collect as much of data as you can, and then you narrow down. Remember that at this stage, we are exploring problems. We are not ideating. No solution, not thinking about any solution. So that's very important, and that's the hard part. And that is where design thinking is an art that needs to be practiced. It's like painting. It's like making a movie. It's like doing anything which requires you to do repeatedly. So the more you do, apply this system, the more you learn, and you will realize how difficult it is that when you're searching for problems, our minds, our brains, which are goal-oriented, tries to jump into solutioning even before understanding the problem deep enough. And this is where you have to pull yourself back, and that's why it's a great idea to have more people, because more people, then somebody would obviously object and say, I think you are now getting into the solution zone. Hold on, let's stay with the problem. Let's stick to the problem. So that's an important thing to understand here. And obviously, when you're listening here, you're not listening to coach. You're listening everything. You're taking all the information inside, because our motive there is to understand, not to explain. So that's an important part. Again, not an easy thing to do. As human beings, we are very incredibly hardwired by this time. Kids do this very well. Kids are by birth design thinker. So we all born design thinkers, actually. We live curious, we're inspired by something, and we really observe intently. We have no idea how to solve it. But over a period of time, we lose that. And so design thinking, in a way, would reconnect or should reconnect you to your childhood way of thinking. So color pencils and those post-its really help. The next stage, of course, then is to ideate. So now we have a bunch of problems, and we have narrowed down the problems, and we have got now, say, from 100 problems, we have drawn insights, and we bunch them, and we say, all right, these are the 20 problems to solve. So for each of those problems now, what would be the solution? What could be the solution? And at this point in time, when you're solving, you again generate multiple solutions. So again, you diverge before you converge into a certain solution. So for each problem, there could be 20, 30, 40 solutions, ways of solving those problems. So you bring them all out. Again, the first few ways of solving is always mediocre. When you go deeper and think more, and you let that simmer in your mind, you have more stakeholders, they pop up something. There's an example where, and I don't know how true this is, but if this is true, this is awesome, that when Colgate was having their meeting with their product managers, and they were trying to see how they could increase the sale of Colgate, it was actually a person who delivers tea, who used to deliver tea in office, who said, well, if you want the consumption to rise, just increase the size of the mouth of the tube. That way people would use more, and you would be able to sell more. So that idea had come from somebody who was serving tea. So ideas can come from anywhere. Human beings are brilliant in the way they process information and they think. So the idea here is to get as many solution ideas as possible. And here the core aspect to remember is, do not judge a solution even before you have taken it into account. So right now we're deferring all judgments. We are not saying, oh, this is a bad solution. Oh, this is an awesome solution. No, we're not doing that. We're just taking solutions and we're putting them all down, and we will judge a little later. Now we see that this is an iterative process here. This is iterative because we might realize that we probably haven't defined the problem right. So let's go back and define the problem right. Maybe we have not really gathered enough data to get the problem. We have hurried it up. We just spent time, but we really don't have enough information. No problem. Go back and iterate and go back to empathizing, spending time, go back to research and gathering data, define the problem again, and then come back to solutioning. That's fine. So, and hence, it keeps design thinking in a way keeps us real instead of getting us to fulfill tasks for the sake of it, right? After ideation, obviously the next stage is, so now once we have narrowed down certain ideas, now comes the time where we have to get it tested in the real world. And this is where the judgment happens. So it's not the thinker, it's not the designer, it's not we who are designing the experience, who are thinking. It is It is for whom we are designing is who is going to. Let me just try and go back. Yeah, we're trying to for the people or the persona or the group of people for whom we are solving the problem and designing. We test with them. So now that's the real test. So they would judge whether the problem that's been identified is right or not, whether the solution that's being provided is helpful or not. And that's where you use an easy, quick, we also say imperfect or dirty mock-ups, which means that you might take in HR parlance, you might take a small group of people and apply a certain policy and tell them, well, this is only for a week or maybe just a month, and see if how you feel or how can you navigate around it. Like, let's say you want to create a system where you can get people to move into different roles laterally, right? And this could be for anybody. So you would say, all right, this person is in engineering right now, and I want to move this person to sales. So you kind of group a certain set of people and say, who are those people who would probably like to try sales? There could be certain engineers who would say, it's not my cup of tea. I have friends who say after a while that sales is who have tried and then said, well, sales is not my cup of tea. And there are friends who are engineers and they love sales, so they tell me to teach them, and they try and be on some of the sales calls that I go for. They love it so much. So if you want to make them do that, so you don't say that, all right, for the next 18 months you're going to be doing this. Instead of that, you say, all right, let's take a 1 month or 2 month approach and see if this is working. So there's always a way of going back to the previous world, and hence it's a prototype. It's still not a perfect way of doing things. And this is where the statement "fail fast and fail early" comes into play. The idea is not to fail. The idea is to succeed. Nobody likes failure. I certainly hate failures, right? And after going through many failures, I certainly hate failures because it hurts, right? It takes you down, and each time you have to pull yourself back up. So it's not failing for the sake of failure. It's going instead. So instead of being in your head, going out and trying and doing things. It's like trial and error, like children do. They would try and stand up, so they'll fall. That's fine. They will try and put their hands in a flame, and they kind of feel the heat and burn their hands, but then they learn. Each time when you're trying to do this, you are also developing failure tolerance. Now, if you become scared that, you know what, we have to play safe, we don't have budgets, or I cannot look bad in front of my management, or somebody else is going to think something about me. Well, all those things, or what the other person is going to think, and all that, all those do decrease our threshold of tolerating risk or failure. It's really not for the weak-hearted. So you really have to have high self-esteem, build on your self-esteem, and have that. And when I say build on your self-esteem as an organization, as a group of people, you need to have that. And that's most important at this particular stage, because you would be surprised to learn how much that you're delivering is actually wrong. And to make it perfect, it takes some time. But once you get there, then you can go ahead and scale it. So then you can apply it across your organization, or if it's a product that you've built, you can apply it across the whole segment, your buyer segment, and that's how you scale your business or you scale your idea. Okay, so far we have, so this is actually the entire system of design thinking, an iterative approach. Pretty simple, but this is what you do. But practice is most important. So what tool sets do we require? So we've gone through mindsets. We said how you should be thinking, slow and deliberate. We went through the skill sets. That is, what's the process that you should be following? What's the system that you should be taking? Tool sets. This is far more easier. As you could see here, there are lots of post-its. So stationery obviously is important. You need a room. It's always better to have a horizontal room, so you have a larger room space. If not, then there are some digital tools also that you can use. In Visio, you can go to any website, just Google and say design thinking tools, design thinking web pages, and you'll find some of the companies who are trying to provide a design thing. So people use Sketch, Figma as well. You can use a PPT as well, but then they don't give you enough room to expand. So for design thinking, you need as much space as possible to walk around, move around, create a full journey, and stick things. So you really need place to move around. So a nice big room is always good to have, and design thinking as a process is better done physically with people than remotely. I have had both sorts of experience, and I would say it's a 1912, so 1920, which means that 1920, which is that the online way of doing design thinking is a little bit not so great. You can still get your job done, obviously, but it's far more fun when we do it physically. It's like painting with everybody together, or you're painting alone at home and sending across, right? So these are some of the tools that you require in terms of artifacts. One of the most important framework that you can use, now there are multiple frameworks, empathy maps and so on, pain gain analysis map, empathy map. This is a comprehensive tool, which is a customer journey map. We call it customer journey, could be employee journey, basically a human's journey map, right? So we use a template like this. And in this template, what we essentially do is we capture what's the journey of that person. So let's say we're trying to help somebody work from home better. So now obviously then we'll have to look at what time the person wakes up, what time has breakfast, sits down to work, and if it's a female, then maybe she's probably helping at home in a different way. Males are also now helping, so I think those barriers have come down now. You have to wash dishes, of course, and clean the floors. And so then what time is lunch? Are there kids or are there no kids? If there are kids, then what's happening? And if there are no kids, then what's the process? How do they navigate their day in a life, so to speak? And then evening and then night. So how are they working? Some people like to work in a deep focus mode. Like I like to work like that, so I can sit for 5 hours, 6 hours straight and just keep pounding at my keyboard and doing stuff. Some people like to work in Pomodoro technique, which is 50 minutes at a time, and then taking a 10-minute break. So you have to understand the process of that person, say in a day's time, on a week's time, what is that person going through? Or for a company, what's the entire process that the company has to go through to complete a certain task? And then, so what are the activities they need to do? And this captures here the emotions, your empathy, the empathetic piece, that what's the, and it's reverse. So we try to break it down. So what are the actions? And from the actions, we're trying to make sense that what could be the feeling behind it. And why is the person doing like this, and what does it think, what information the person has, and what could we improve in that. Now, let me take you to an example. So this is one of the examples. So I had created this for a company which is in the insurance sector, and they had a problem where they wanted to create awesome experience for their customers who are their insured, who they insure. At the same time, they wanted to minimize frauds. Now, this is a tough problem to solve, that you're trying to minimize fraud, which means that you might inflict pain on some of your customers, but you're trying to have great customer experience. So you're trying to have high NPS, Net Promoter Score. How do you do that? So obviously, one way to do that is just apply what the others are doing, imitate. The other one is try a design thinking process. And what we did here was that we broke up the entire cycle of insurance into stages. That, well, what a typical user would do is, from the user's point of view, that will apply for insurance, there would be an underwriting that would happen. The user, and at the time of using it, they will file for complaint. So from underwriting to claim settlement, and the claim would be settled. So at each stage, what would be the activities that would happen at each stage? So for example, when the user applies, user logs through, say, an insurance web portal, or maybe a broker fills the form for the person, to user files for claims, calls to a number and files. So that kind, so you note down the activities. And so we want to now capture what could be the areas of fraud here. So we put in as much information as we can, and figure out the areas of fraud. what tools or technologies are being currently utilized uh, uh, at this point in time, what's the impact to the insurer, what's the impact to the insured, and hence the feeling is captured as well. And this is a perfect way to understand where work needs to happen so that you can create an awesome experience. So the next part would be to create a proposed journey map, a new type, a new experience, a new way of doing things, right? So it could be, again, the same set of activities, slightly different. So use a different way of doing it. So maybe like using Aadhaar card, and it's like from one place, all information is being utilized. What kind of frauds are being then narrowed, being saved, and what cannot be saved. What would be the change in technology? So are those technologies feasible? So only feasible technologies go up here. Some technologies may not, like blockchain, while it's being mentioned here, maybe blockchain is still not at that stage to be utilized. So then that will fall down, and this may not be perfect. But then what would be the impact to an insurer? What would be the impact to the insured? And so are we then creating a happier environment for both the insurer and the insured? So in a quick glance, this is a template that can be utilized for design thinking. Let me give you another example. This is, so this looks great when you do it on a sketch or something. This is all done by hand, and most of the design thinking work is done by hand. Let me try to see if I can increase the focus a little. So this we had created a year back when we were trying to create a better hiring process, or try to solve problems in the hiring process for HRs. And we went from timeline, which is 1 week to 4 weeks, and less than 1 week, 1 week to 8 weeks, so on and so forth, till exit. And what are the stages, right, from business requirement to management decision to candidate identification. So what would be the activities? So what would be the customer journey? Who all will be involved? What would be for each? So this is a hiring manager, team manager. I can't read it right now here. So for all of them, we created what would be their feeling, what would be their thinking, and how would and what can be made better. So this is one of the examples of how you create. So these are all white chart papers that we put on a wall. This is in my house, in my previous house, and you write everything on your post-its, and you post it there. And then why post-its? Because it's easier to remove or easier to move around. So and that's why we use post-its. Make sure to have good handwriting, or use the person who has better handwriting to write it down. Otherwise, you'll be ineligible later. And this is my last slide. So if you want to learn more about design thinking, there are a few books that I've listed down here. One of my personal favorites is the one by Dr. Pawan Soni, which is Design Your Thinking. It is a new book, and I found it exceptionally helpful. The reason is lots of stories, all stories from India, written by a practitioner. So he conducts workshops for design thinking, and a lot of things that I have shown in terms of images, I have borrowed from his book. So this is a good book to pick up, and this will give you a much more detailed and better flow with stories and examples to understand design thinking better. So with this, let me stop my presentation. If you have any questions, you want me to go back to any slide and explain that further, let me know.
So before we move into the Q&A session, we will be initiating the poll to capture the feedback of our participants. So would request all our participants to kindly share your feedback on our today's session. While you all are doing so, would request you all to even have questions pertaining to our today's session shared in the chat window so that we can have them addressed. Once again, I thank all our participants for joining our session today. We have received a lot of inquiry about the e-certificate offered by HRAI. You can all claim your certificate by sharing your details to the email ID provided on your screen. We will email the e-certificate to you based on details received.
I think we can take questions.
Yes, yes.
Meanwhile.
We can take questions. So we have one question that we have received from Dr. VLN pertaining to empathy, the slide that you had shared on empathy. Uh,
Mhm.
if if were an addictive trait and become routine with time, will quality of design thinking become saturated and yield low returns on implementation?
Okay, I want to hear that question again. I don't think I have understood the question. Let me
Yeah.
just go back to, just give me a second, let me just go back to that slide. Okay, here's the one. Yes, what's the question? Can you tell me
Yeah, it's
again?
on the empathy one. If
Mhm.
were an addictive trait and become routine with time, will quality of design thinking become saturated and yield low returns on implementation?
Okay, so that's a good question. Okay, yes. So if you're going to apply the same habitual, rote memorized way of doing things, two things can happen. If it's coming from deep experience, deep expertise, it's a boon. But if it's coming from, say, hearsay, something that you would have heard somebody say, and it's just the way you feel, and you're applying that thought process, but may not be applicable to the other person for whom you're trying to solve the problem, then it becomes a bane. And that's why one of the things that we try and do when we're doing design thinking is to include more people into that workshop. So instead of having one person, so it's not the job of just a UX designer or a UI designer or a product manager or a sales manager or anybody, not one person's job to design the experience for anybody. It's a group activity, and 5 to 7 people is always good. More than that sometimes becomes a crowd. uh, but in about 5 to 7 people you would have most of the stakeholders, and you'll have a diverse thought process. And if you're not having that kind of diverse ideas, then you might want to look at what kind of people you're hiring within your company, or what kind of people do you have in your circle. You definitely want to have diverse perspectives.
Thank you, Tarun. So, coming to our next question, that's from Tushar. How do we align employees' individual objective with organizational objectives using design thinking technique? Example, based on strong business need, management wants 5 employees to change technology stack from X to Y, whereas 3 out of those are not okay with the new settlement. At this, as this deviates them from individual objectives. Being an HR manager, how do we act on this?
Well, no straight answer, right? So complex problem. um, if it's a complex problem, which means that we don't know exactly what to do about this, there is no precedence which has worked perfectly in the past. Obviously, there's human, so it's going to impact the morale of your employees. But there is a business need. So just like the example I gave for insurance company, that they wanted to stop frauds or minimize frauds, but at the same time, they did not want their clients or customers to feel unhappy. So how to balance that? And hence it's important to get the stakeholders into a room, and first understand, question why does the business require that sort of, so why does the business require that there should be this kind of a certain change in the KRA of the engineers? What's stopping the engineers from moving into that direction? What are the fears? What are the opportunities and fears there? The HR can help moderate that. So the HR here becomes the UX designer, or I would say the design thinker, it's not one person's job to solve, right? But somebody can moderate. So so that person can bring in people from business and people from the other side who are being affected into one room, and probably set up a 2-day workshop or 3-day workshop, and break it down, or spend some hours to break it down one piece at a time, and see where the problem is, and then try to start solving from there. It's possible to solve.
Thank you so much, Tarun. We have a next question from Ritesh, who's asking, how can design thinking help in change management process?
Okay. Um, so again, so it depends on. So design thinking is to, I would say, I think a good line that I read in Pawan Soni's book is, what Six Sigma is to quality, design thinking is to experience, right? So if you're trying to make any change, that means you're going from a certain situation to an uncertain situation. And if that involves human beings' lives, then you might want to look at what are the areas at which it will impact the person's life. Now, there would, again, as I said, multiple stakeholders. This design thinking essentially is a process of change management. It is essentially a process of changing the way people do things today to how people would be doing things tomorrow, right? So it is indeed in itself a process of change management.
Thank you so much, Tarun. We have seen multiple more questions that are coming in. We'll definitely have that addressed via email, keeping the time in mind, the time constraints in mind. Definitely a perfect thought through session with insights on empathy, on how effectively one can use design thinking in finding a solutions to their day-to-day problems. It has been a pleasure being with you today. I'm sure our participants have benefited out of this enlightening session. Before we conclude with our today's session, we would also want to thank the association members, Keisha and NASCOM COE, for supporting these HRAI events. To know more about these associations, request you to kindly visit the link provided in the chat window. Thank you once again, Tarun, and our participants for joining us today. It was great to have you all here. Do join us for our next masterclass tomorrow on management and strategic lessons from Panchatantra by Mr. Bikash Agarwal on the 23rd of Jan 2021. Request you to kindly register for this event at the link mentioned in the chat window. Also to join the Dialogue 2021 WhatsApp chat group through the invite link shared in the chat window. That's it from us today. See you soon. Stay safe, take care, and bye for now.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Peterson. I hope this was informative and helpful. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, ping me, and I'll be more than happy to share more. I'm not a master. This was more to share my learnings and hopefully be a little helpful. Anything that you think has been shortcoming in my presentation or what I've not explained well, please give me that feedback, because only that can make my presentation better for others to learn. And if you want to get me into run a design thinking workshop for you, I think we can help you with that as well. Let me know.
Absolutely, Tarun. It was definitely an enlightening session. We all have liked the inputs and details shared by you. For details and in-depth learnings, we'll definitely have the questions shared with you so that we can have those answered for our participants. And regarding the same, we have already shared your details in the chat window, where we will have our participants connect with you for the same. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you all for joining in. Thank you, Shyam. We will now conclude with our today's session.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.